Welcome to Community Watch, and today we will be discussing House Bill 202, the Integrity and Election Bill, I think it is, something to that degree. But stay with us. Community Watch starts now.
And welcome to Community Watch. Greg, how are you?
Just fine, sir, and yourself?
Well, I'm all right. I'm very glad that we have returning with us today Scott Akemon, who is professor of political science at Georgia Highlands, who has helped us through some thorny issues in the past. And boy, we need his guidance again here. How are you, Mr. Akemon?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And thank you for the kind words. I don't know how much guidance I can offer through what appears to be a legislative minefield, but I'll do the best I can.
Well, just to clarify, the minefield that we're dealing with this time is Bill 202. Is that the number?
Senate Bill 202.
And it has already been signed into law. That happened pretty quickly, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
For a bill? Is that?
Well, it wasn't abnormal in terms of the speed, but the governor had a much longer time to take it under consideration than what he did. He could have thought about it quite a bit longer had he chose to.
But in saying that, Scott,
Yeah, go ahead.
I know a lot has been made of that, how quickly he signed the bill. And I know from an optical standpoint, it may not look good, but does that really matter? I mean, if he knew he was going to sign it, he could have waited, but would it have been do you think there would have been a different reaction to him signing it later?
Yes and no. Yes, I think there'd be a different reaction in that he could have made the argument that he and his aides took the time to look through it, because this isn't just a one-off piece of legislation. This thing tackles one issue, but from a variety of different angles. With the president of the United States, when he's given legislation, before it ever comes to the president, and this is regardless of who the president is, there's been a team of folks that have looked at this, and they've already informed the president of what his party upside is for that piece of legislation and what his party would view the downside of that piece of legislation is. With the governor, he had a really, really good idea of what was coming his way. But at the same time, he did not have a group of advisors that were well aware of how this thing was going to shake out once it was signed into law.
Well, we're talking about a voting, I guess we call it a voting rights bill, that was, I believe, in the 90-something pages in length.
It was forever long.
And has been very controversial, not just in Georgia, but nationally. And a lot of the controversy concerns whether or not the changes that occur as a result of this bill would adversely affect some people more than others, and what the motivation was for the bill. So I've heard a great deal, and I think everyone has heard a great deal from partisan corners about the bill. And I don't know if it's possible to look at it just objectively to talk about some of the changes, but let me start with this. Some elements of the bill, at least, seem to be a reaction to or an attempt to prevent voter fraud or I'll just say it that way, voter fraud of one kind or another, even though there was no real evidence of fraud in the recent election. So the need for a voter fraud bill is unclear to me. So help us with that part. I mean, is that the motivation for this bill, to prevent voter fraud?
I think it is for some.
Yeah.
To me, this bill is like a giant ball of string that's got about 42 different ends. You don't know where to start and you don't know where it's going to end. I think absolutely some folks are sitting back going, oh my gosh, Georgia hasn't gone Democratic in a presidential election since 1992. Georgia hasn't elected 2 Democratic U.S. senators since the 1970s. This has to be fraud. I'm sure that there are people that are saying that. Now, having said that, there's a couple of things that we need to take into consideration. Number one, there was a pandemic. We encouraged, as did the other 49 states, in an election year to maximize voter participation. We encouraged people to make use of the absentee ballot program. So immediately people say, oh gosh, that's where the fraud is. It's in the absentee ballots. Okay, if that's the argument that folks want to make, so be it. But at the same time, where's your evidence? Was there fraud in last year's election? Yeah, absolutely. To what scale, I have no idea. But there's been fraud in every election. We don't know to what level. And so what do? We try to overstep to correct. Another thing that really bothers me that nobody has brought up is how our state's population has changed in the last 20 plus years. And what I mean by that, my wife is from metropolitan Atlanta. When she talks to her high school classmates from 30 plus years ago, their running joke is it's hard to go to Atlanta and meet someone from Atlanta. You go to Atlanta and you meet someone from New York or from Chicago or from Los Angeles. And, our state is one of a handful of states that has gained congressional districts over the last 20 years. Our population is growing at a faster rate than other states, but we're not growing at a faster rate because we're reproducing at a faster rate. No, we're growing at a faster rate because folks are moving to Georgia from New York. Folks are moving to Georgia from Illinois. Folks are moving to Georgia from California. And not everybody that's moving into Georgia reflects Georgia's political views. Folks are moving into Georgia with their views from their home states, whether that's to the left or the right of the spectrum. And I think that has had more of an impact on the way Georgia's vote has changed than fraud has. But I just explained the vote away in terms of the change in 5 minutes. There are folks that they don't want to do that. It has to be fraud. You can't just explain it away with logic and reasoning.
Scott, I'm curious. You said there's fraud in every election. So therefore, there is, so some people do have legitimate claims about they're concerned about fraud. Regardless if it's based on whatever reason. You said there are some. But despite, I know, the several recounts and things of that nature, has Georgia ever had a fraud problem? Let me put it that way. Have we had a fraud issue in recent elections?
Well, I can't say
it's a problem. To the scale that it's been a problem that needed to be addressed.
No. For me, I would want to go back to the 1946 election where Gene Talmadge died before he took his oath of office as governor. That's the election where we got 3 people running around claiming to be the governor of Georgia. That's also the election where 73 dead people came back from the grave and voted in alphabetical order. I guess you have time to organize when you're, beyond the world, so to speak.
But that, even if 73 dead people had voted in the recent election, it wouldn't have changed anything.
No, these folks that are upset about the election are upset thinking that you have massive, fraud that's being encouraged by elected officials, by, community officials. If it is by far the most impressive fraudulent voting scheme I've seen in American history that's not been proven in court yet. When I say that fraud occurs in every election, yes, there are some people who go out of their way to commit election fraud, who conduct felonious activity with intent. But a lot of fraud is by mistake, it is by accident, it is by oversight. Folks have moved, they've not, changed their address, so to speak. Election day rolls around and they go, oh gosh, it's time to vote. And instead of voting where they're supposed to in their new precinct, since they haven't done a change of address, they go and vote in their old precinct. It's doubtful you're going to get a lot of juries to convict and sentence people to prison for that. And I'm not asking that they do, but the extent of fraud is what we don't know. And I just want to say, anytime the system changes, when you get a score, so to speak, that you weren't expecting, that's when people are going to start screaming fraud. Let me put it to you this way. What if the Republicans had won both U.S. Senate seats in Georgia? And what if Trump had won Georgia's electoral votes? Would we have Senate Bill 202 right now, what is now known as the Election Integrity Act of 2021? I doubt it very seriously. So, in order to explain how your party lost, well, the easiest way to do it, instead of saying, we didn't do our homework, we didn't campaign, we didn't roll our sleeves up, we didn't knock on doors and ask people what we could do to keep their vote. Instead of saying all of those things, the easiest way to explain it away is say, well, we were cheated. Someone took the election from us. They didn't earn it.
I'm gonna be honest. I haven't read the bill, and I hear, of course, it dominates the airwaves. It dominates just about in all conversations that I'm in. And I'm just curious, and I know we're getting short on time, but I'm really curious from your standpoint, are there some things in the bill that you feel that really will restrict voting access to the polls? Because there's a lot, we can claim things, but I know several studies have been out lately that I've been hearing about what he's saying actually voter registration and voter participation is up in the Black and brown community. So I don't know how much time we have left, but I really would like to get your opinion on that, because I hear a lot of claims, but I'm not always sure if those claims are just part of being partisan.
The way the law is written, there are a number of opportunities for groups to be, if you will, in an area where they have to meet an undue burden in order to vote. The thing that sticks out to me the most is counties like Fulton, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Clayton now only having one drop box for absentee ballots. If you're a senior citizen and you don't drive yourself, that puts a huge undue burden on you to get an opportunity to get your ballot into the one location that it's legally accepted in your county.
In the whole county?
In the whole county. Now, that's not the way it was in November, but that's the way it's going to be going forward.
Well, we need to take a quick break here, but we will continue with the discussion right where we left off, so don't go away.
For 50 years, Georgia Highlands College has been a community that takes charge. At GHC, we have a mission to provide access to an outstanding education, meeting the career needs of the region, and helping our communities thrive. Every student we graduate becomes a celebration never forget. We are more than Chargers. We are Chargers taking charge for 50 years and beyond.
Welcome back to Community Watch, and today we're having a conversation with Scott Akemon, who is professor of political science at Georgia Highlands, and we're talking about the Senate Bill 202, the Voting Rights Bill. Scott, what was it that you called it? Voting integrity?
It's the Election Integrity Act of 2021.
Okay. And you were, when we left off, you were talking about the changes in Dropbox access.
Right.
So Dropboxes are being limited in number. Are they not also being limited in terms of times of access?
Now the time, from what I understand, it's 7 days a week, and it's supposed to be from 7 to 7. But that's kind of up in the air in terms of clarity, because previously they've let you drop for 24 hours, 7 days a week. And so I don't know where that 7 to 7 time is coming in. That's an election day time. But if this is a Dropbox, I've got to go back and read the law in its entirety there. But the big concern is, like, you go back to this past November in counties like Fulton and Gwinnett, there were 23 different locations to drop your ballot in some places. Now you're going to whittle that down to 1.
So what's the motivation? What is the motivation for that change? I mean, if not to make voting more difficult, what is the motivation for that?
Security. You're making sure that no voting fraud is going to occur. Now, I don't know how you're going to make sure that none's going to occur by making it more difficult to vote. But again, I don't understand why you're correcting something when you've not proven that there was an issue to begin with. To me, you tighten your security when you can prove that there's fraud. All I've heard is claims of fraud. I've yet to see the proof of fraud.
Now, if I'm correct, Scott and Dr. Hirsch, I do believe the governor made it mandatory that every county had to have at least one drop box, I think.
Yeah,
and I believe that's the argument they're making, is how they they expanded access by making it mandatory in every location, every county. So technically you expanded it because it's not required in every county, but it's limited tremendously in certain counties like Fulton and Clayton and those huge counties, because they only have one spot.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, to me, let's look at Chattooga County. It's not the most densely populated county, but if you live in Menlo and you got to drive 9 miles to Somerville to vote, again, it might not be 30 or 40 people, but that might keep 30 or 40 people from voting. How many elections are decided by 30 or 40 votes? Too many, in my opinion. I don't understand, if we've had counties that had almost 24 drop boxes, why we can't allow folks to, utilize maybe school locations, K through 12 locations, where you also have precincts and opportunities to vote on election day as well. But again, if you limit the number of people that vote by limiting the number of places where you can vote, it might work to your advantage if you're that one particular party. The thing that troubles me the most about this law, and there's so many different things that trouble me. There's some smoke and mirrors, to say the least, because you can say, okay, we're limiting folks who vote by limiting drop boxes, but they've also expanded voting in terms of expanding the numbers of days that you can go vote early. It's not, and this is probably what makes it so difficult for folks to wrap their mind around. It's not just one direction where they're ripping you off in one direction by taking away opportunities. They're replacing some opportunities, but when you limit one person's voice, You can't replace that by giving someone else an opportunity. Another thing that really troubles me, and I would say this if the Democrats were in power, I'm not just saying this because the Republicans are in power. I would say this, irregardless, one party's going to be in power, one party's going to be out of power. And that is now the legislature as a whole can go in and count votes. They can bypass the Secretary of State's office. They can bypass Brad Raffensperger. And as a legislature, they can count ballots and they can strike ballots. You don't have to have a crystal ball to conclude, well, if the Republicans control the legislature and they want to strike a few ballot boxes in order to win an election, now they've got a law that allows them to do that. Of course, maybe the next election, maybe 2 election cycles from now, maybe the Democrats take over. If that happens, what would keep them from wanting to use the law to their advantage, much like the Republicans? The thing that concerns me when it comes to counting votes, or more importantly, striking ballots, is that it's done basically by one party in front of the other, as opposed to a bipartisan commission. I would much rather have a commission striking ballots than one party over the other. That, to me, is the most slippery slope in this legislation to going directly back to Jim Crow.
Well, Scott, let me pose this to you then. When you think about it, when I think about it, I'm just kind of amazed at how so many legislators could vote for this. Like, how many representatives could vote for this and thinking that it was okay when they went back home? Is it just me, or is it most Georgians are just okay with this?
Well, it's one of those scenarios where the people who lost are angry, they're confused, and I don't think that they're not intelligent. I think that, the dust hasn't settled to a point where they can understand how they lost the election. If anything, I guess I want to say they still have sticker shock from the election. They can't back up and accept that the demographics of our state has changed. And with the change in the state's demographics, it has changed the election results for our state. You're not going to have the same results that you did when the population changes. And people can't accept that. So what do you say? Oh, it's got to be fraud. We can't say that our electorate has moved to the left. Oh, no, that'd be too easy. The thing that bothers me is when you have one group that says, oh, it's because of fraud, let's correct it with this law. Well, when that group is no longer in power and the other group has become, the group in power, what are they going to be willing to do to hold on to power? Are they going to change the laws as well and claim that they're doing it for the right reason? Absolutely. I mean, it's a slippery slope. And I agree with Dr. Hershey. How do you back up and look at this objectively without saying, I'm looking at this as a Republican, I'm looking at this as a Democrat?
Well, I guess I'm struggling with, go ahead, Doc. I know you have a question.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, what I guess I'm struggling with, and I'm just going to call it like I see it, is that for me, those that are in the legislature, they know the truth. I mean, they know the numbers. I can see I'm from Chautauqua County. I can see some people not being in the loop, not understanding the whole numbers. I can understand how some people may be convinced that it was fraud based simply by what they've heard.
Right.
But I don't think a elected official that is operating out of the Capitol, operating out of the Gold Dome, knows better. They know the numbers. They have access to this information.
Absolutely.
So to me, that's what bothers me is the need to maintain power so great that people are willing to change the law and also affect, people access to the polls simply to maintain power. And to me, that's really what it looks like, because they know better. They have the data. Republican governor, Republican Secretary of State, there's no Republican legislature that doesn't have the data that they need. And the fact that they still will push a law and pass a law, to me, that's what bothers me.
And I don't have any issue with that. I mean, whether we talk about Chattooga or Floyd, both of them are conservative counties. They're both Republican counties. Did Trump do as well in these counties as he did in Metro Atlanta? No, he did much better in these counties than he did in Metro Atlanta. But of all these people that are moving into Georgia that we've been talking about that are changing our state's demographics, not many of them are moving into Floyd County. Not many of them are moving into Chattooga County. The counties that change the outcome of the election, the Fulton counties, the Gwinnett counties, the Clayton counties, that's where you see a lot of migration from other parts of our country or immigration from outside of our country. And yes, our elected leaders know exactly what's going on, but they have, and again, I don't want to point this just at one party. Collectively, our leaders, they profit on our ignorance. That's how they, get us to buy into what they're selling. We don't know any better. And the more believable they make it, the more we want to run out and sign up for it.
Mm.
Well, we've got about 3 or so minutes left. Are there other provisions in the bill that we want to call attention to while we're talking about it?
Well, another thing that really bothers me, and I have no issue with asking folks to have an ID to vote because we don't charge folks to have an ID to vote, but they have shortened some of the times now between runoffs, between a primary and a primary runoff, between the general election and the general election runoff. That bothers me because if you're an absentee voter, your window of opportunity to get that ballot has shrunk. And if you don't have an ability to get a ride to the election office, you might not have a voice come election day.
Now, the absentee voting that we had so much of in the fall was largely due, and earlier in the year too, was largely due to the pandemic. So is the change, does it seem that much more dramatic because we're used to what happened now in the past year where it was so easy to vote absentee, or are these changes still significant compared to absentee rules previous to this past year?
Well, that's a question I'm not really in a position to answer because anytime you do something, there's a learning curve. And I think that with the best of intentions, we tried to get as many folks to vote last year as we could. Now we're standing back, and I say we, the leaders in power, and saying, maybe we made it too easy, So how do you make it restrictive yet not illegal? And I think that's why this thing is as cumbersome as it is they try to make it restrictive but not illegal. Easy but not too easy.
But I will say this to that, Doc. I think we have forever changed the process. I was one of those people that I always voted on Tuesday. Super Tuesday or whatever, I was going to vote that day. I was going in afterward. But now it's like, I can't imagine waiting to the last day to vote. To me, it's almost like I can't believe that I was still doing that. So for me, I know now early voting, for me, just makes more sense. But I was one of those people that prior to this election, I always voted on the day of the election. But I can't imagine me doing that again now.
Well, we're about out of time. I am so sorry to say, because I feel like we've just touched the surface of this. But Scott, thank you again, and we'll have to have you back, I feel certain.
Anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for being with us this week. We'll see you next time on Community Watch.